She was only 7 years old when she walked up to a stranger and said, "I want to go to school, but my mommy doesn't have money." He thought it was just another sad story. But what he discovered about the little girl moments later changed his life forever. Stay tuned, because you are about to watch a beautiful story and find out how it changed his life forever. Hello family, welcome to Tales by King. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. The morning sun was already bright when Bernard Cole drove slowly down the quiet road. He was not supposed to be driving himself. Normally, his driver took him everywhere. But that day, the driver was sick, and Bernard didn't want to wait. He had an important meeting in the city and was already late. Bernard was a successful businessman. Very rich, very respected, but also very tired. His mind was always full of numbers, contracts, and meetings. His phone never stopped ringing. Even while driving, his phone buzzed again. He sighed and ignored it. As he approached a small bus stop near the market, traffic suddenly slowed. A group of school children crossed the road, laughing loudly. Bernard watched them quietly. They all wore clean uniforms, carried backpacks. Some held their parents' hands. For a moment, Bernard felt something strange in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. He stopped the car near a small roadside shop to buy bottled water. As he stepped out, he noticed someone sitting alone on the old wooden bench at the bus stop. A little girl. She looked about 7 years old. She was small and thin. Her dress was old and faded, once pink but now almost colorless. Her shoes were too big and torn at the front. One strap was already broken. Her hair was tied into 2 small ponytails, but they were messy, like no one had time to fix them properly. She held a small notebook tightly to her chest, as if it was very precious. Bernard didn't know why, but his eyes stayed on her. Something about her looked lonely. The little girl was watching the other children as they walked past with their parents. Her eyes followed them slowly. She didn't smile. She just watched. Bernard bought his water, but didn't leave. He stood there, pretending to drink, while still looking at her. Suddenly, the little girl stood up. She walked slowly toward him. Her steps were shy, careful, like she was afraid he might shout at her. She stopped in front of him and looked up. Her eyes were big and tired, but kind. Her voice was very soft. "Uncle, please." Bernard froze. He was not used to strangers talking to him, especially not children. "Yes," he replied gently. "Are you lost?" The little girl shook her head. Then she said the words that would change Bernard's life forever. "Uncle, I want to go to school, but my mommy doesn't have money." Bernard felt something heavy drop inside his chest. The noise around him suddenly disappeared. The cars, the market, the voices. All he could hear was her small voice. He bent down to her level. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sophie," she replied. "My name is Sophie." "That's a beautiful name," Bernard said without thinking. Sophie gave a small, shy smile. "And where is your mother, Sophie?" he asked. "She is at home. She is sick. She cries a lot." Bernard swallowed. His throat felt tight. "Why did you come here alone?" he asked. Sophie looked back at the road. "I sit here every morning," she said. "I see children pass here with school bags. They talk about their teachers. They talk about books." She hugged her notebook tighter. "I also want to learn how to read properly. I want to write like them." Bernard looked at the notebook in her hands. It was old. Some pages were torn. Some were dirty. "What's inside it?" he asked. Sophie opened it carefully. Inside were random letters, broken words, childish drawings of a school, a teacher, and a big sun. "My mommy taught me small," she said proudly. "But she says she cannot pay school fees." Bernard felt his eyes burn. He had just signed a contract worth millions the day before. And here was a child begging for something as simple as school. "Why are you telling me this?" Bernard asked quietly. Sophie looked at him honestly. "Because you look kind." That simple answer hit him harder than anything. Bernard stayed silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Can you take me to your house, Sophie?" Sophie nodded immediately. "Yes, uncle." She didn't know why she trusted him, and Bernard didn't know why he followed her. But both of them had no idea that this small walk would soon reveal a truth that would shock both their lives forever. Bernard followed Sophie quietly. She walked in front of him, holding her small notebook in one hand. Sometimes she looked back to be sure he was still there. They passed the busy market. Women shouted prices of tomatoes and peppers. Motorbikes moved in and out. People laughed, argued, and bargained. But Sophie stayed silent. She only walked. The road slowly changed. The shops disappeared. The noise became less. The buildings became older and broken. Finally, Sophie stopped in front of a narrow path. "This is our way," she said. Bernard looked at the path. It was small and muddy. Dirty water stood on both sides. The smell of waste filled the air. Bernard hesitated for a second, but Sophie had already entered. So he followed. They walked past several small rooms made of wood and rusted zinc. Some had no doors, just curtains. Children played on the ground with empty bottles. A woman washed clothes in a bucket. Everyone looked tired. Sophie stopped in front of one small room. There was no real door, just a blue curtain. "This is our house," she said softly. Bernard felt his heart sink. Sophie pushed the curtain aside. Inside was dark and hot. There was one thin mattress on the floor, a small table, 2 plastic chairs, a broken fan that did not work. On the mattress lay a woman. She looked weak, very thin. Her face was pale. Her eyes were half closed. She slowly opened them when she heard Sophie's voice. "Mommy, I am back." The woman tried to sit up. "Sophie, where did you go?" she asked weakly. Then she noticed Bernard. Her eyes widened. "Who is this?" she asked, fear in her voice. Bernard quickly spoke. "My name is Bernard. I met your daughter at the bus stop. She told me she wants to go to school." The woman stared at him. Then her eyes filled with tears. Her name was Rita. She looked at Sophie, then back at Bernard. "I am sorry," Rita said softly. "I did not send her to beg. I never told her to ask anyone for help." Bernard raised his hands gently. No, she didn't beg. She just spoke from her heart." Rita covered her face and started crying. "I try," she said between tears. "I really try. But life has been hard. I lost my job 2 years ago. Since then, everything has been falling apart." Bernard slowly looked around the room again. No fridge, no food, no light, only one small pot in the corner. Sophie stood beside her mother and held her hand. "Mommy cries every night," Sophie said quietly. "She thinks I am sleeping, but I hear her." Rita turned away, ashamed. Bernard felt something painful move inside his chest. "How old are you?" he asked Rita gently. 28, she replied. Bernard was shocked. She looked older than that. Life had not been kind to her. "And Sophie's father?" Bernard asked carefully. Rita froze. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the mattress. "He left," she said after a long silence. "Before Sophie was born." Bernard nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." Rita looked at Bernard again. This time, she studied his face. Not just a glance. A long, careful look. Her eyes moved from his eyes, to his nose, to his mouth. Her hands started shaking. Bernard noticed. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Rita swallowed. You look very familiar," she whispered. Bernard frowned. "I'm not sure. I don't think we've met before." Rita quickly looked away. "No, maybe I am mistaken." But her voice was not strong. Sophie looked between them. "Mommy, Uncle Bernard is kind," she said. "He listened to me." Bernard smiled weakly. "I only followed her home. That's all." Rita wiped her tears. "I'm sorry you had to see us like this," she said. Bernard shook his head slowly. "No, I'm sorry you've been living like this alone." There was silence in the room. Only the sound of distant traffic and Sophie's breathing. Bernard stood up slowly. "I need to go now," he said. "But I will come back." Rita looked at him, surprised. "Why?" Bernard looked at Sophie, then at the small notebook in her hands. "Because a child who wants to learn deserves a chance." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really?" Bernard smiled gently. "Yes, really." And as he stepped out of that small room, Bernard did not know it yet, but he had just walked into the beginning of the greatest truth of his life. Bernard walked back to his car slowly. The noise of the market returned to his ears, but his mind was far away. Sophie's face stayed in his head. Her eyes, her small voice, her notebook. "I want to learn how to read properly." Bernard sat inside his car, but did not start the engine. He stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Something about that little girl was disturbing his heart. Not just pity, not just kindness. It felt deeper, stronger, like a memory trying to wake up. He finally drove away, but even during his meeting, Bernard could not focus. People talked about contracts and profits, but all he could see was Sophie sitting on that wooden bench. That night, Bernard sat alone in his big, quiet house. The house was beautiful. Large rooms, soft lights, expensive furniture. But it felt empty. He poured himself a glass of water and sat on the couch. For the first time in many years, he felt uncomfortable in his own home. He picked up his phone and called his assistant, Mark. "Mark," he said, "I need you to help me find information about someone." "Of course, sir." "A woman named Rita. She lives behind the Central Market. She has a daughter named Sophie. I want to know her background." Mark was silent for a second. "That might take some time," he said. "I want it done quietly," Bernard added. "Don't let her know." "Understood, sir." Bernard ended the call. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Rita's face came to his mind. The way she looked at him. The way her hands shook. The way she said he looked familiar. A strange feeling passed through Bernard's chest. He stood up suddenly and walked to his old drawer. He opened it and brought out an old photo album. He had not touched it in years. Inside were pictures from his younger days. College. Old friends. Old trips. Then he saw it. A picture of a young woman. She was smiling. Her name was written at the back. Rita Morgan. Bernard's heart stopped. He sat down slowly. "That's not possible," he whispered. He stared at the photo again. The eyes. The nose. The smile. It was the same Rita. Just younger. Just healthier. Just happier. His hands began to shake. Rita. Behind the market. A child named Sophie. The time. The years. Everything started connecting in his mind. Bernard remembered clearly now. 8 years ago. He had a short relationship with a woman named Rita. She worked at his company then. They were close. But he traveled abroad for business. And lost contact. He tried to call her later. But her number was no longer working. He assumed she had moved on. He never imagined. She had a child. His phone rang suddenly. It was Mark. "Sir," Mark said slowly, "I found her records." Bernard's heart beat fast. "Tell me." Rita Morgan worked at Coal Industries 8 years ago. She resigned suddenly. There is no record of marriage. No record of another partner. Bernard swallowed hard. "And Sophie?" Mark paused. "She was born 7 years ago, sir." Bernard closed his eyes. 7 years. The room felt like it was spinning. Mark continued carefully. "Sir, the dates match." Bernard's voice was low. "I want a DNA test." There was silence on the line. "A DNA test?" Mark repeated. "Yes," Bernard said firmly. Discreetly. "But sir, I need to know the truth." Mark understood immediately. "I will arrange it." Bernard ended the call. He stood in front of the mirror in his room. He looked at his own face. Then he imagined Sophie's face. The same eyes. The same shape. The same calm look. Bernard slowly sat on the bed. Tears filled his eyes. "If she is mine," he whispered. "Then I failed her." For the first time in his life, Bernard was not afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing time. Time he could never get back. The days that followed felt very long for Bernard. Every hour felt like a year. He checked his phone many times, waiting for Mark's call. At work, Bernard became quiet. He stopped shouting at staff. He stopped caring about meetings. He stopped even checking emails. His mind was only on one thing. Sophie. He kept seeing her small hands holding the notebook. The way she looked at him with hope. The way she trusted him so easily. At night, Bernard could not sleep. He walked around his big house like a stranger. For the first time, he noticed how empty it felt. No laughter. No child's voice. No warm presence. Just silence. On the third day, his phone finally rang. It was Mark. "Sir, the result is ready." Bernard's heart jumped. "Tell me," he said quietly. Mark took a deep breath on the other end. "Sir, the DNA test shows a 99.9% match." Bernard closed his eyes. The world stopped. "She is your biological daughter," Mark continued. Bernard dropped the phone from his hand. It fell to the floor, but he didn't notice. Tears ran down his face. He sat on the bed, shaking. Sophie, his daughter, the little girl at the bus stop, the torn shoes, the broken notebook, the small voice asking to go to school. All of it hit him at once. He covered his face with his hands. For a long time, Bernard just cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, painful tears. "How did I not know?" he whispered. "How did I not find her?" That evening, Bernard drove back to the house behind the market. But this time, he did not go inside. He parked far away and watched from his car. He saw Sophie sitting outside with other children. She was drawing on the ground with a stick. laughing softly. Bernard's heart broke again. She had been living this life. While he lived in comfort, he waited until the children went inside. Then he stepped out of his car. He walked slowly toward the small room. Rita was sitting near the doorway, washing clothes. When she saw Bernard, she froze. "You came back," she said softly. Bernard nodded. "Can we talk?" he asked. Rita stood up slowly. Sophie came out from inside. "Uncle Bernard," she smiled. Bernard bent down and hugged her tightly. She was surprised but happy. He held her like he was afraid she would disappear. "Go inside, my love," he said gently. "I want to talk to your mommy." Sophie nodded and ran inside. Rita and Bernard stood facing each other. The air was heavy. Bernard's voice was shaking. "Rita, Sophie is my daughter." Rita's eyes widened. She didn't speak. She didn't deny. She just closed her eyes. Tears slowly rolled down her face. "You knew?" Bernard asked. Rita nodded slowly. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" Bernard's voice broke. Rita cried harder. "I tried," she said. "You left the country. Your number changed. Your office said you were unavailable. I went there 3 times. She wiped her face. "I was pregnant and scared. I didn't want to fight your world. I thought you had moved on." Bernard shook his head in pain. "I would never abandon my child." Rita looked at him. "But you did without knowing." Those words cut him deeply. Bernard stepped closer. "I'm here now," he said, "and I'm not leaving again." Rita looked into his eyes. For the first time, she believed him. Inside the small room, Sophie was listening quietly. She didn't understand everything, but she heard the word, "daughter." She walked out slowly. "Mommy, what does daughter mean?" she asked. Bernard knelt in front of her. His voice was gentle and full of tears. "It means, I am your daddy." Sophie stared at him. Her mouth slowly opened. "Really?" Bernard nodded. She looked at her mother. Rita nodded too, crying. Sophie suddenly smiled. Then she hugged Bernard tightly. "Does that mean I don't have to call you uncle again?" Bernard laughed and cried at the same time. "No, my angel," he said. "You can call me daddy." And in that moment, Bernard realized something painful and beautiful. He had not just found his daughter. He had found the part of his life he never knew was missing. Bernard stayed kneeling in front of Sophie for a long time. She was still holding his neck tightly, like she was afraid he might disappear. "Daddy," she said again, smiling. That word entered Bernard's heart and never left. He stood up slowly, still holding her hand. Rita watched them quietly. Her eyes were red from crying, but for the first time in years, there was also a small light inside them. Bernard looked around the small room again. The thin mattress, the broken fan, the empty corners. This time, he didn't feel pity. He felt responsibility. "I don't want you to live here anymore," Bernard said gently. Rita froze. "What?" she whispered. "You and Sophie deserve better. Both of you." Rita shook her head slowly. "Bernard, I don't want to be a burden." Bernard smiled sadly. "You are not a burden. You are my family." Rita covered her mouth and cried again. That same week, Bernard moved them into a new house. Not a mansion. Not something too big. Just a simple, beautiful home with clean walls, running water, light, and space to breathe. Sophie walked around the house like she was dreaming. She touched everything carefully. "The floor is shiny," she said. "The toilet works," she shouted happily. Bernard laughed for the first time in years. 2 weeks later, Bernard took Sophie shopping. They bought school uniforms, new shoes, new books, a pink backpack. Sophie kept hugging the bag. "This one is really mine?" she asked again and again. "Yes, my love. All yours." The night before her first day of school, Sophie couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed in her new room. Bernard came in and sat beside her. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "What if I make mistakes?" Bernard smiled and brushed her hair gently. "Making mistakes is how we learn." Sophie thought for a moment. Then she said, "Daddy, I waited for school, but you waited for me." Bernard felt tears fill his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "I waited without knowing." The next morning, Bernard personally took Sophie to school. Rita walked beside them. When Sophie entered the classroom, she turned back. She ran and hugged Bernard again. "I will study hard," she promised. Bernard knelt and kissed her forehead. "You already make me proud." Sophie walked inside with her backpack bouncing. Bernard stood outside the gate for a long time, watching. Rita stood beside him. "She looks happy," Rita said softly. Bernard nodded. "She gave my life a meaning." That evening, Bernard returned home, and found Sophie reading her first book out loud to Rita. She struggled with some words. She laughed at her own mistakes. Bernard sat quietly and listened. And for the first time in his life, his big house was no longer empty. It was full of voices, full of laughter, full of life. Later that night, Sophie walked into Bernard's room. "Daddy," she said, sleepy. "Yes, my angel?" She hugged him and whispered, "Thank you for stopping at the bus stop." Bernard closed his eyes and held her close. "No, Sophie," he said softly. "Thank you for finding me." And in that moment, Bernard understood the true lesson of his life. Sometimes, destiny doesn't come with loud miracles. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the voice of a little girl saying, "I want to go to school." And that simple dream becomes the beginning of a forever family. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you find this story worth watching. If you do, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories, like, comment, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Your support and engagement encourage me to post more videos. Thanks for watching.